Hi, it's Christine with Moonshine Safari and
Anthony.
So we are up to Chapter 5 in Outlander, the books, and we are still solidly in Episode 2. And just as a quick reminder, if you don't like spoilers for the books or the shows, you should stop listening.
Correct. No spoiler.
Exactly. Spoilers abound. Okay, so at the end of Chapter 4, Claire basically is asleep in her room in Castle Leoch. And Chapter 5 opens with her kind of waking up. She's a little disoriented because she's waking up after all of the events of her going through the stones and meeting all the Scots and traveling and battles and all that stuff. And she's now in the castle in a room, and as she's trying to wake up, she hears Mrs. Fitz going, "Hey, get up, get up, get up, get up!" And all of a sudden, it kind of dawns on her everything that's happened. So Mrs. Fitz, first thing wants to do, she wants to get her properly dressed. So many clothes, skirts and overskirts and shifts and just corsets and oh my.
That's why you needed the perfume.
Yes.
All the B.O. B.O. be happening back then.
You know it had to be stinking.
Anyway.
Had to be stinking everywhere. Woo! Anyway.
You just get used to it.
I get, So besides the fact that Mrs. Fitz, they all think she was in her slip, she also wonders why Claire would cut her hair so short, which it was basically a bob length hairdo, shoulder length, which was really short for the time. She even kind of wonders out loud women who would cut their hair short so that they could hopefully pass as men as they were traveling, etc. So just things like that Mrs. Fitz is curious about. But she tells her she has to get her properly dressed. She wants to get her fed so she can take her to meet himself, which I always found that interesting, the way they refer to, like, the laird is himself. He's like the landlord. Or, I don't know.
We're lairds. We actually have a full title because we own a little bit of patch of land over in Scotland. So,
you go a square.
Lord. So when you see me, you can call me Lord.
And a lady.
Or laird. Lady. Lord and lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
So she's going to go see himself, and she realizes that she better think up a story because himself is going to have questions. So she's kind of wondering, and when she's thinking about everything that happened, with the castle, because she had known it as a ruin and not, obviously now she's seeing it as a working castle. So she's wondering kind of what's going to happen to all the people there, and she realized, oh, you know what, I really kind of need to worry about me for now and figure out what my story is going to be. She realizes she's very far out of English hands. She's deep in Scottish territory. She's not going to be walking next door and knocking on the Redcoats' doors and asking if they can help her. And besides, to be fair, Redcoats weren't really exactly helping her before. So Mrs. Fitz takes her up to a tower room, and that's where Colum Mackenzie's room is, and we are meeting Colum for the first time. So he is the laird for Castle Mackenzie. Colum Mackenzie. He is Dougal's brother.
There you go.
Aye. She gets there, and he's not in there, and so she sees this beautiful bird cage. He's got lots of stuff. Most of the castle is pretty sparse, but his room is very plush and stuff like that. And she's
Is that where she was looking for the date?
Yes. So what happens is she's in the room, and he comes in and he introduces himself to her, and she sees him, and she's sort of shocked because from the waist up he looks a lot like Dougal, but he's about shoulder height to her because his legs are jacked.
He's like way bow-legged.
Yes, he's bow-legged. It's arthritic. It looks like it's painful, and she feels kind of bad for him, but he's aware of how he presents to people, so he kind of gives her a second to recover herself. So Frank had kind of, back in her regular time, Frank had kind of given her some hints and tips about when you're being interrogated by people, and he told her, stick to the truth as much as possible, because that gives you less fake details that you have to remember. So she had devised this entire story about what happened. And he goes, well, my brother, meaning Dougal, found you and said he found you in some distress. And she goes, well, if you want to really know, he kidnapped me. So she's just going to open it like that. She tells him, look, she wants to go back to kind of where he got me. She wants to go to Inverness. She was going somewhere and she's been interrupted. She tries to make the story match the parts that they know. She tries not to tell him anything that didn't really happen between her and Dougal, her and Blackjack Randall, her and Murtaugh.
Oh, Murtaugh.
Bless America. Because she figures he knows all that anyway, and if she starts lying about that stuff, it's just, they're going to suspect her even more. So while she's in the middle of all this, Colum excuses himself, and she starts looking around because she wants to know what time she's in. And she manages to find a letter, and on the top of the letter it says it's April 1743. So at this point, she is 202 years before the time that she should be in, because she was in 1945. She's in shock. He brings some snacks back with him. She kind of attempts to eat, but she's just flat out doesn't even know what to think about it. So they're talking, and Colin says, well, if that's all true, because she had a whole story, she got waylaid by some bandits, and she had a manservant, and he was killed, and all this stuff. And he's like, well, okay, but what happened to your clothes? And she didn't really think to bring that into the story. And it's clear he's not too sure about her, but he kind of says,
But doesn't she say something about her losing him because of what Captain Randall does?
She doesn't really say that, though.
But she implies it in the story.
Yeah,
I mean, in the show.
She was being assaulted.
Right.
I mean, she was being assaulted. So truthfully,
and he already knew that that's what he kind of, his proclivity was to rape.
He doesn't necessarily believe that Randall would be raping English women in the countryside like that. He has a hard time buying that. And she's like, well, I guarantee you he's totally capable of it. And so he's like, well, maybe. He's just not too sure about her story, basically. And she goes, well, you don't believe me? And he goes, well, I haven't been the laird of this castle for over 20 years just by buying every story somebody tells me. It's kind of how he handles it. That's kind of how the story ends. He goes, for now, you're a welcome guest of Castle Leoch, and you're welcome to stay. You're a guest here. And so he's not really giving her any answers about her leaving at this point. That's kind of how they leave it, and that's kind of how the chapter ends. The entire chapter is really devoted to her first meeting with Colum. Still solidly in episode 2. You have not progressed yet as far as this goes if you're trying to match the books up with the show.
Nope.
Colum is clearly very clever. That seems to be a Mackenzie trait. Dougal's no fool. Colum is no fool. Jamie is a Mackenzie by blood. He's no fool. So.
Well, they both suspect that she's not who she is presenting herself to be.
Right.
And I think Dougal more so sees her as a English spy, being that she's English. But I don't think Colum sees her as a spy, but there's something else there.
Well, he's just not sure. Like you said, he's just not sure. There's a lot of talk later about, well, if she was a spy for the English, she should know some Gaelic. She doesn't know any Gaelic. Things like that. So, yeah, they both suspect her of just not telling the truth, which is true. She's not telling the truth, but that's because she really can't at this point.
Correct.
So, okay, that is chapter 5. We will continue with chapter 6 next week. And again, we're still in episode 2. See you later.
Bye-bye.